What is going on, guys? This is Jagnal back again with another video, and today we're going to be reacting and giving my thoughts on the power rankings that have dropped for EA College Football 25. There have been some very interesting placements on this list. Now, I do have some thoughts on how they could have come to this list and how I think it's kind of a marketing gimmick that they're doing, because I have it broken down in a different way that kind of makes it seem a little bit, not as controversial, but we will dive into that later. But I think we should start off with like the top 25, just breaking it down, just like how I did with the toughest places to play. So we'll go, in chunks of 5. So we'll first start off with the top 5 just to get them out of the way, which I think is probably the easiest to rank. So first off, you have Georgia at number 1. I will say that is probably the easiest one, and then they are a 95 overall. Try not to touch. I'm not going to touch too much on the overalls in this top 25 list that I'm breaking down. I will do that later in this video because I will explain it a little bit in depth. But yeah, so that's just something to keep in mind. So Georgia is 95 overall, so there are no 99 overall teams, which is good. I mean, that's fair. I don't think there is a quote perfect team, which means in terms of like recruiting, you could get to that high level. But I know in like some NCAA games, some teams were 99 across the board. So that is interesting to see. So right after, you have Ohio State at 2, and they are a 93 overall. And then Oregon, Alabama, and Texas. Again, these are entering the low 90s. So again, there's not a lot of high overall 90 overall teams. So it does seem like they are really trying to really kind of create the divide between power teams, and that, the top 5 team, the top 1 team, there might be a little bit of a gap between them. But I do think Ohio State, Oregon, Bama, and Texas are fair. I do think this is mainly built off of like rosters and not like how good the teams are going to be, because I don't think power rankings are the same as like the AP poll. I think people don't are trying to think that this is what would be like the rankings, the preseason rankings, and maybe this is what will show up on like dynasty mode, but I think they should use like the AP poll. But if they use these power rankings as their like initial rankings for the game, then that's fair. But I do think like a team's performance also is it's like a little bit different for like their actual poll rankings. So that's just something to keep in mind. Then you have Clemson at 6, which is kind of crazy. I know that is a very interesting placement, because they had a little bit of a down year. I mean, down year for Clemson, still winning a lot of games, so they still did pretty good. But they're at 6, which again, no like AP poll or preseason poll has them in the top 10. I don't think so. Again, pretty wild. Notre Dame at 7, LSU, Penn State, and Utah rounding out the top 10. These are interesting rankings, nevertheless. I don't think they're completely controversial, except for the Clemson placement, but maybe Notre Dame at 7 could be a little high, but I think these are overall fair. Like, I don't really think these are bad rankings. And then you have Michigan at 11. So if you're a Michigan fan, you're like, whoa, we just won the national title. We still have a really good defense, and we're at 11. I do think this is kind of fair, though, because like Michigan is like, they lost their quarterback, they lost a lot of players, so they could end up being great again, but we don't know. So I think 11 is fair. Florida State at 12, that's kind of, I think, fair to what it should be normally. Miami at 13, again, valid. And then you have Texas A&M at 14. Again, this is a very, I think this is mainly like just probably their talent carrying, which I think this is a thing. It's a talent rating, not really like how the coaches is. Like, I don't think coaches have an impact on this at all. It's really like how your players are. And then you have Ole Miss at 15, which I know if you're an Ole Miss fan or have a lot of hype for Ole Miss, you're like, what the heck? They're a top 5 lock, right? Well, in this case, it may not be the case. But then this is where it goes even crazier. Then you have Colorado at 16. Okay, Colorado at 16, a team that won 4 games. They've won 5 games over the last 2 years, and they're ranked 10, quote unquote, ranked 17 in these power rankings, which is, or sorry, 16 in these power rankings, which is insane. And then you have Oklahoma, which is fair. I think Oklahoma, Wisconsin, USC, and then Virginia Tech. I think the only outlier here would probably be Virginia Tech at this point. I don't really see, any other place. Like, yeah, Virginia Tech is yeah, I think Virginia Tech is underrated. So I didn't think putting them at 20, that is bold, but I'm glad they did that. And all the other ones, like, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, USC. I think Wisconsin, again, a little underrated. They kind of were under the radar. Had that new coach, Luke Fickell, obviously not in the game, but I think they're probably going to improve this year. Again, USC, we'll see how that goes. And then I think the last five. So NC State, again, NC State should be a little bit higher personally. Then you have Kansas. Okay, Kansas mentioned. That's great. We love to see Kansas. Kansas is probably going to be a decent team in this game, so that's good. And Arizona as well, which again, I think Arizona might be slept on a little bit because I know they kept a lot of their good players, even though their coach left to go to Washington. Again, coaches, whatever, but I think the philosophies, of the coaching philosophies are still going to be in there. It's weird because there isn't going to be a Mike Norvell, there isn't going to be a Kirby Smart. So it's how much is a coach going to matter, and how is it going to impact when you're the coach for your own dynasty? So that's something, again, that we'll just have to see, how is the ranking engine going to work? And then you have Oklahoma State and Iowa rounding out the top 25. So I did want to just go through this really quick, but overall, what I just wanted to say is, this isn't something that I would be really upset with. I'm not gonna be someone that'd be like, this is ridiculous, this is a joke, how is EA Sports doing this? Because let's look at these overalls. This is where we really need to break down, because the way EA Sports has placed these teams, it just makes, I can see that they were trying to stir the pot a little bit. So if you look at Georgia, they're the only team that's a 95. Then you have two teams that are 93 overall, Ohio State and Oregon. And then Bama and Texas are 92s. Clemson, Notre Dame, LSU are 90s. And then you have a few 88 overalls. And then from number 16 Colorado down to 25 Iowa. And I think there's probably even more 87 overall teams. All of them are 87. So I think, and then there's a team that's missing from here, Tennessee. I think Tennessee's the one that's missing. They could be an 87 overall, but they're just not on the list because, they don't have to. Or, yeah, if they could just put any 87 overall team on there just to stir the pot. And of course they're going to put Colorado at the top of the 87 overalls. I don't think this means that Colorado is a better team than Oklahoma, Wisconsin. I think they're all on equal standing. Now it comes into now we have to break it down into how are they doing these ratings. So I think it's probably based off of the players. So it's going to be, your best players and your entire, I think it's either going to be your entire roster. So if you have, for example, Colorado has Travis Hunter, they have Shedeur Sanders. I'm sure they're going to be, highly rated players. So I have a feeling that Colorado might be very top-heavy, where they have highly rated players, and then they may have, some lower-rated players that keeps them from being, in the 90s or something like that. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm saying, maybe, their offensive linemen who have, seen to be pretty weak over the past few years, maybe those are in the 70s, but they have a lot of players that are in the 80s and 90s that kind of cancels it out. So I really think it's kind of like an average for your entire team. So I think there could be some teams that are top heavy with their talent, and then there could also be teams that are bottom heavy with they have a bunch of decent players, a bunch of 85 overalls. So maybe if a guy gets injured, they're not going to have a huge fall off. So that's my thoughts on that. And I don't think coaching has nothing to do with this as well. So for example, a coach like Mike Norvell, he's been I think a coach that has done more with less. He's not the greatest recruiter, but he's, I think, done well at developing players who aren't 5 stars into pretty decent players. So I would say that's just an example because I'm an FSU fan. So if your coach is really good, it doesn't really take that into a factor. So there's not the Nick Saban factor or the Kirby Smart factor. Now, obviously, they have really, really talented rosters, which obviously pushes them to the top. But then there's those schools that have always done more with less. I think Michigan, for example, they wouldn't have a 99 overall roster, but would still perform really well. They could still beat Ohio State, which is a team that's technically had more talent than them in the past. So I think that's how they've done the ranking. So I wouldn't try to get super upset about this. But then, let's just go ahead and do a visualization of this. Let's just break these down into tiers instead of doing, a 1 through 25, because that's how you get a better look at this. So if I'm going to put some images on screen. So I made some graphics to show, the power rankings. So if you look at the first one, we have Georgia. They're the only 95 overall team. So they're the tier 1 team. Tier 2 is going to be the 93 overall teams, which is Ohio State and Oregon. Then you have Alabama and Texas at 92. Those are the tier 3. Tier 4 is going to be the 90 overalls with Clemson, Notre Dame, and LSU. And when you kind of break them down into tiers, it starts to make a little bit more sense. Now, then you can think, okay, Clemson as a tier 4 90 overall team, that could be a little crazy, but you also think Clemson always has like really good defense. So they could have a really solid defense. I know they have some really good receivers. They always recruit well. So I know that even though they're Cade Klubnik has struggled a little bit in the past, or maybe he'll have a breakout year and they've been a little quiet, doesn't mean they don't have the talent. And again, same with like LSU. Like LSU has some insane talent that people just haven't known about. So then we keep going on to the next graphic, and this is where it gets much more interesting. So then you have the tier 5. So all of these teams are ranked 88 overall. So I have them in order. So like, for example, Penn State, Utah, Michigan, Florida State, Miami, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss, they're all technically on the same level. So even though one team is ranked in the top 10 and one team is in, the 15s, technically they're on the same level. And I'm kind of glad that they did that, because it shows that like power ratings may not actually just show like, it just shows that these teams will be, pretty equal on the field, but since each team plays a different schedule and different, like for example, Florida might be like an 85 overall team, but since they play such a tough schedule, they may lose a lot of games. But that still doesn't take the fact that they're not like a talented roster, if that makes sense. Like if you play a really tough schedule, you're probably gonna have more losses than if you played a cupcake schedule. That's just kind of how it works. And then if you look at the tier 6 schools, the 87 overalls, this is where you see a lot of variety. And I think this is where you'll start to see like teams that have good offenses but bad defenses, or good offenses but not as good defenses, stuff like that. So like I think Colorado is going to have a good offense. Oklahoma, I don't really know what Oklahoma. I think they might just be solid across the board. I think Wisconsin's going to have a good defense. USC is probably going to have a good offense. Like you can just tell like what teams are probably going to be like their offense or their defense might carry them to this rating. So yeah, that's really kind of my thoughts here. I didn't want to make a super long video just going into it. I also didn't really care about diving into the actual rankings of offense and defense, because again, it's just power ratings. These are just like the ratings they've given the players, and people have really been making a big deal about it. But overall, I wouldn't get that a huge fuss about it, because in the end, if you're playing a dynasty, after year 1, year 2, year 3, all the players are going to be different. They're all going to be user-generated players that you recruit. So it's not going to matter. It's really only going to matter if you do like head-to-head, play now. Those are the only things that matter when it comes to these ratings. I do think it's cool that like the 25 and the number 1 they're only off by 8 rating points. So it does kind of show that there's some parity in the top 25. But I also want to see like what are the lowest schools? Like what is the lowest rating? Is it going to go into the 60s? Are we going to see a 50 overall team? Yeah, so I want to hear your thoughts. Now, overall, I do think some of these ratings are crazy. I think Colorado is definitely overrated. But, like, guys, again, it's trying to stir up a conversation. Like, EA is trying to get people to talk about the game. They're trying to get people to pre-order the game. So I think they did a good job with the marketing for this week, especially with the sights and sounds kind of plunged right in the middle. That was kind of a really good way to kind of get people to get hyped again. But yeah, that's really going to be it for now. If you guys, subscribe if you want. We're a growing community. I think I will probably make some announcements soon about like Dynasty, like an online Dynasty that we're going to do together, and maybe some rewards attached to it, because I definitely want to give back to you guys. I now just joined the YouTube Partner Program again, so I will be able to make a little bit of money off of the ads, so I'm going to try to put that money back into this channel. So hopefully we'll be able to give back to the community and subscribe and comment, and so you'll be the first to be aware of these things. But other than that, this has been your boy Jagnal. My name's also Tyler, by the way, so you can call me either. And I will see you guys next time. Also, have a great weekend, because I'm recording this on a Friday.